Okay. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? We've got a big topic to cover in a short amount of time, so I want to make the most of it. First off, let me thank everybody for joining and taking some time out of your day. We're pleased to talk about a topic that's quite important to us and quite important to a lot of leaders and a lot of organizations. And so, looking forward to a good discussion with the group that we have assembled here today. By way of introduction, so my name is Ned Calder. I'm a managing director at Innosight. For those who aren't familiar with Innosight, we're a growth strategy and transformation firm, co-founded by Clay Christensen of the Harvard, Business School. I'm joined here by three of my colleagues to spend some time talking about this topic of sustainability and growth. I'll do real quick intros. We have Claudia Pardo. So Claudia is the leader of our European office. She's got a great background, broad industry experience, but really is a deep expert on all things consumer packaged goods and retail. Kelsey Beuning is also based in Europe. She's the co-lead of our sustainability practice and is really drives a lot of our thought leadership on the topic of sustainability. So excited to have her as well. And then last but not least, Scott Anthony. Scott is many things. He's currently a senior advisor to Innosight. He spent a lot of time with Innosight in his career, helping to grow the practice. He is also the clinical professor of strategy at Dartmouth College. And if that wasn't enough, is a prolific writer, speaker, author on all topics related to growth and innovation. So excited to have him join us as well. So with that, why don't we, dive in and Scott, maybe I could, pass it to you. You, Claudia, and Kelsey recently, wrote an article, intriguingly titled, sort of the paradox of sustainability and growth. Maybe you could unpack sort of that frame and what you all were thinking, and we'll put a link to the article in the chat here for folks.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Ned, and thanks for having me as part of this discussion. And thanks to everybody for joining this discussion about what, as you said, is a really, really important topic. So this traces back a few years ago, back to when I lived in Singapore. I got a call from someone who was a senior leader in a big conglomerate in Singapore asking to do a couple of sessions for top leadership, board, CEO, et cetera, about the topic of sustainability. And I said, well, you must have the wrong number because I'm not a sustainability expert. My field is really innovation and growth. And the person said, just go and talk to some of your colleagues at Innosight. Ask them what they're seeing and the work they're doing about sustainability. So I did that, and I was surprised by two things. One, the number of projects that Innosight was working on that had a sustainability angle to them. I didn't expect that. Two, the very clear parallels between approaching innovation and approaching sustainability. Innovation is a complex system level issue that requires you to master a whole range of different things to get right. There are these tensions, these paradoxes between the short and long term, between exploring and exploiting. Sustainability is a complex system level issue that requires you to grapple with a lot of tensions, short and long term. Are you going to extract or regenerate? Things that feel paradoxical at their nature. We'd spent at Innosight 20 years unpacking, untangling innovation and saying it need not be a paradox. You really can not either or, but both and. This presented then an opportunity to think about how you could do the same thing for sustainability. So as I was getting myself grounded for the sessions that I ended up running, I recalled a discussion that I had with Clay Christensen, who you mentioned, got Innosight off the ground in 2000, in Innosight's early days. We were doing a project for a health insurance company, Aetna, and one of the leaders that we were working with, I remember distinctly, Joyce Petrella, came into Clay's office, 2004, and said, Clay, what does it really take to do innovation at scale inside a large organization? In that classic grandfatherly like voice that Clay was so famous for, he said, well, Joyce, it comes down to three things. You need to have a common language, you need a process, you need demonstration projects. Now, I have no idea if Clay was just making that up on the spot, but it proved to be a very resilient, very powerful way to frame up complex system level issues, something that was used repeatedly for innovation, something that holds true for sustainability as well. So ultimately, when Brightline and Thinkers 50 said, we're working on a project to create a book about driving sustainable innovation, how to do well while doing good, it was a very easy yes to combine together our experiences and say, what does it take to deliver that language, that process, those demonstration projects, so you can break the seeming paradoxes of sustainable growth? So that's the origin story of the chapter.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm curious, Scott. I mean, you've been spending a lot of time with leaders on this topic. Say a bit more about why leaders see this as paradoxical and some of the struggles they've had with it.
Yeah, so Wendy Smith and Marianne Lewis in the book Both and Thinking describe a paradox as a persistent, interdependent contradiction. Things that persist, that are tied together, but seem to contradict with each other. And sustainability, you really have that writ large. There is short term, there is long term, there is purpose, there is planet, there is profit, there is extract and exploit resources, there is regenerate and create resources. And you can see in each of those things a relationship between the two and what feels like a tension, what feels like I can either do this at one time or that. And the trick, really, whenever you encounter a paradox in business, is to say, how do I step back? How do I reframe? How do I see the possibility where I'm not constrained by these either ors, but I can be empowered and enabled to turn them into both and possibilities? It's not easy to do, of course, and we'll explore in more detail how to do it. But that really is the trick for sustainability and any of these kinds of tensions that
Mhm.
people face as leaders.
Yeah, that's great. And Claudia, maybe I could bring you into this conversation. You and I were talking earlier about how this topic is and the paradox associated with has just become an increasingly important issue for senior leaders and really the top of their agendas. Maybe you could share a little bit about how you've seen this grow in terms of importance to senior leaders and some of the factors driving that.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think one thing that goes back into this paradox, if I reflect on the conversations we were having 5 years ago on sustainability, it was really about compliance, right? So it's a limiting factor. And this goes back to the point that I have to do it. It will cost me money. How can I get to my objective? And I think as the years have evolved, we see significantly higher number of stakeholders that are actually demanding this from businesses, from consumers that expect that companies will be responsible with the planet and offer a product or service that will be protecting the future, to employees that may be choosing who they decide to join based on the stand that that company is taking on sustainability. We talked about governance and regulations as well. Those continue to be even more strict. We have targets, we have deadlines, we have milestones, and this level of involvement is being spreading across different geographic regions. And lastly, we also now see interest for investors to actually look at the actions that companies are taking. So these are, again, like something went from just being something I have to do because of compliance to actually really being a very complex demand from multiple stakeholders that we are going to be facing.
Yeah, that's great. And I'm guessing, as we enter a sort of macroeconomic environment that is increasingly, complex with all the issues going on in, across the globe and, money not being as cheap as it used to be and a whole host of factors that the paradoxical nature of this topic gets magnified, doesn't go away, but, becomes even more complex to navigate how you make progress on both fronts.
Exactly. And you have all these tension points. And it goes back to that analogy with innovation. We cannot forget that innovation is going to play a role to be able to reach these objectives. They are very demanding objectives. And just by doing things slightly different and making marginal improvements will not allow us or anybody to actually reach those targets. So having the opportunity to step back to what you were saying, right? Like this is a complex issue. In order for us to do things differently, we need to think differently and we need to look at the problem in a very integrated way. It's a complex organization with things that depend to each other. It's not just about what the organization can do or the company can do internally, but also the impact around their ecosystem that they play in. So having that perspective is quite important, and I think this is why we also see the role of innovation to get there, continue to be very linked to achieving your sustainability targets.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so complex problem, super important problem. How do we make progress here? I thought it was interesting in the article. You start with this point about common language and sort of describe that as foundational for making progress. Claudia, maybe talk a little bit about the importance of common language and how you've seen that in organizations.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to begin with, right, when you're having a conversation as a group, like it is so often the case that you think you're talking about the same thing and you're actually being very passionate and you think it was a terrific meeting. And then at the end of the day, actually, one person of the team was thinking that sustainability meant this and that. And the reason why that's important is that when they go back to their day-to-day job and they're going to be taking action or finding opportunities to do something differently, the thing that they decide to invest on or to double down on may be the wrong path. So having just a common language allows the opportunity for the organization to make progress on the way they want to do. And the common language, I mean, I think Scott was also mentioning at the beginning, needs to be something very simple, something that anybody can actually describe. And doesn't matter, you don't get into a broken telephone game where
Yeah.
if you ask one person in the organization what sustainability means for you, it's something very different. So again, very simple, trying to align the organization onto the same common goal so that the actions and the resources and the energy is spent on those things that actually are what you want to accomplish. I think that's point number one. Point number two, taking that idea of this is what I want to do in sustainability and be able to split it into maybe a couple or two, three or four different types of efforts that you want to pursue. And the reason why it's important to be, you have to have something simple, but at the same time, it cannot be so general that then you don't know how to make it actionable. Having these categorizations allows you to actually be able to be very thoughtful about what are you identifying to make progress. And the categorization can be as simple as saying, okay, this is what we're going to do internally to improve our operations and our production processes. This is what we're going to do externally as a way to bring new solutions or products to our customers. Or it can be even more advanced as like, how can we actually really look comprehensively at the value chain and the ecosystem to see how we can all together contribute to reaching our sustainability goals. So having that categorization allows you to be more specific. And even more so, if you are able to provide an example of the type of efforts that will fit into these categories, that also helps the organization relate to what you want to accomplish. One last point that I wanted to make on this idea of how do I make this common language trickle down in the organization, rally up my troops to go into the same direction and make it actionable. Another thing that is going to be important is that we look at it in small pieces, right? So again, having these examples that I can relate to will really allow for the organization and for everybody, every member of the company to really understand what we're talking about and direct their efforts.
Yeah, yeah, clearly critical. Kelsey, I'm curious, you've looked at a lot of organizations. Any that stand out to you in terms of, really having nailed this, common language challenge?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, I think that it's the kind of challenge that many organizations, even if they've nailed maybe parts of it, it's a work in progress. As Claudia was saying, one of the most challenging elements of this is sustainability is such a big topic, a big area. And how do you break down what does that mean for us? One CPG company that, I think has done this really, really well is Unilever. They're kind of a classic example, but they are kind of best in class in this area. And what I really like about what they've done is they've broken down sustainability by the strategic intent of the organization. So it's very clear, what does this mean for us? And they do this in three ways. They say, what are the sustainability improvements that are focused on our core operations? How do we improve sustainability in our ecosystem? And then third, what are the new revenue generating sustainability opportunities for us? And then within that, they're able to get very specific, right? So for example, in number one, they say, they have a target of 100% of their materials being sustainably sourced, which starts going into, circularity and helps just break down some of these really big, really tangible issues into something that's just a little bit more manageable for the organization.
Yeah, that's great. It seems like it's important that they've both created a language for sustainability, but it's interwoven, with other language constructs that they use for, just driving the core business, and those aren't, completely, separate things, but they're woven fairly seamlessly together. That's great. Okay, so that's foundational common language. Scott sort of described this as sort of a system level problem, and I think that probably characterizes what it takes to really drive this in organizations. You need to think about many things that need to be put in place across the organization to realize this. I'm curious, Kelsey, what do you see as some of the really critical processes and enablers that help companies sort of navigate this topic?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks, Ned. It's a great question. And it's an interesting question because I think that, as Scott was saying in the beginning, we see here a lot of parallels to the ways that we break down common problems within innovation. And there's four kind of key enablers that we've really seen be helpful when we've, been working with and supporting some of our clients on this. So the first is having clear strategic commitments. We mentioned this in the context of a common language, but setting a clear goal, a clear, tangible aspiration to work towards is really important. The second is having clear dedicated resources, and those can be, financial resources, so the investment you need to, make some of these sustainable initiatives happen, but also the people resources. And some of the organizations that we've seen be the most successful in this have, for example, a board of directors representative who's responsible for this topic area, or a key C-level leader who, takes this on as one of their key topics. The third are, the embedding this in the enabling processes, specifically kind of the resource allocation processes within an organization. And one of, my favorite examples of this, we were recently working with a CPG client, and they had been thinking about new innovations. They wanted to drive new revenue. They had a really ambitious aspiration to do this. And as they were thinking about some of these new products, and new business initiative, new business models that they could pursue, they had set up their initiatives as they had all their normal initiatives and they had their sustainability initiatives, right? And so they said, here's all the typical ways we're going to drive revenue, and then here's our three sustainability projects on the side. And that wasn't, I think, unsurprisingly, kind of getting them very far. And so, one of the things we did as we worked together with them was to think about how can you actually embed sustainability into the way that you evaluate all of your projects from the get-go, into kind of what we like to call the goals and bounds of how you think about the projects that you pursue or don't pursue. And this has actually been really successful for them now. So now, of the new projects and products they've launched in the last couple of years, over half of them are contributing positively in a sustainable way. So we've really seen this sort of embedding this in an enabling process rather than having it be kind of its own thing off on the side, be really, really successful. And then the fourth piece is just ensuring you have a supporting culture. And I think culture can feel a little fluffy, but what we really mean by that when we talk about that at Insight is we mean those are the day-to-day behaviors. So those are things like, referring to yourself as the kind of company you want to be. And I think just one thing I'll say kind of on top of all of this is, having those four pieces is important, but what's most important is that they work all together. So the transformations that we've seen be the most successful are the ones where a company has done all of these things. That sounds complicated, but there are companies who've done it and done it very well. I saw there was someone from Copenhagen actually joining the call today. So I think maybe an example I'll mention, which is one of our favorite transformation stories, is Ørsted, which is a Danish energy company. They've really transformed from, in 2010, having 80+% of their revenues be from fossil fuels to now 90+% are from wind and other renewable energy sources. And they did all of these things, right? So they had a clear commitment. We run on green energy. Here's the percentage of our revenue that comes from that. They had a separate business division that they funded separately. They had a clear set of external processes and investments for wind energy. And then they also set up norms and culture, including starting to refer to themselves every day as a renewable energy company. That became how they called themselves. And so I think that just is a great example of how these pieces can work in tandem to create kind of a very sustainably driven transformation.
Yeah, that's great. It seems in that sort of description of not creating, separate processes, a separate island for sustainability, but, merging them together with core processes and weaving that together seems foundational to navigating the paradox that, Scott described, above. Claudia, anything that you would add to that? Any other experiences that you've seen from other clients?
Yeah, I mean, I think another thing that is important is to, be able to share into the organization that this is possible. And the role of demonstration projects on doing so, it's quite important because again, at the beginning, when you're going and embarking in this, something that seems so daunting, so big, so different, like so difficult and far from what we're doing today, trying to see the path to get there into specific, manageable, small success, little wins. Those wins are going to be able to, first of all, convert any skeptic internally, allows you to also learn from it, and then be able to expand it, right? So one example that I can quote is, Philips. Philips, back in 2012, they said they put an aspiration up front. They said we want 15% of our revenue to come from solutions that are circular, right? And 10, 12 years after, by 2022, that number was already 18%. They had passed that target. And now they up their game, and now they want to be 25% by 2025, by next year, right? So it's really important. And the way they got there wasn't just like by doing a complete overhaul of every single business and try to like figure out ways of optimizing and turning circular every single business unit, but it was really about being very intentional about picking specific functions or specific projects, select number of pilots, start small, make it happen, see how it works, and then use that to then see the learnings and apply them more broadly into the organization. So again, celebrating successes, understanding and also learning from losses, but doing that in a manageable way, little by little. Those demonstration projects really allow you to rally up the whole organization for it. So it is possible,
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think some of the failure modes we've seen in organizations is when they make too big of a bet and they get over their skis and they don't have the opportunity to iterate and learn. And then you have the flip side of all the kind of benefits. The skepticism creeps in, the ability to iterate is lost. So that makes a ton of sense to me. So that's great. Those are all, really important practical, lessons. Maybe in the last, 5 minutes, we can come back to a topic that seems fairly foundational to all of this, and is always the case, the sort of pesky humans, and how do we get the leaders who have to be driving this, and thinking about this in all the right ways that you described. That seems like that requires the right mindset. So maybe Scott, maybe I'll put this to you. You've been thinking a lot about leadership and getting people in the right mindset. What do you see as the sort of right mindset? How do you get leaders in the right mindset to be able to navigate this paradox and sort of drive some of the changes that we've been talking about?
Well, Ned, I think the phrase pesky humans is exactly right. I think any kind of issue like this, it is very easy to take all of your mental energy and say, let's go solve the technical part of the problem. Let's get all the things that we talked about here right, and not think about the human part of the problem. Of course, the things that we've talked about are necessary, but they're not sufficient unless leaders are ultimately thinking and acting the right way. There's no shortcut or silver bullet. It's a complex issue. We could spend hours talking about it. But if there was one suggestion I would offer up, it's really getting leaders to play with the notion of time. So this, I think, is a really important thing. And there was a great academic study that I think demonstrates this. Natalie Slowinski was the lead researcher. Paper about 10 years ago looking at producers in the oil sands in Alberta and how they approach time in different ways. Those that took a very short-term perspective had very short-term answers, and they became very self-serving, and they became very individualistic. Those who took a longer term perspective could see things that were more interdependent, could bring coalitions together, could see more expansive solutions. So I think if you are, as a leader, able to shift your time perspective and even do things like, if one of my children ultimately takes this organization over, what does it look like? If I think about the next generation of people who are running this organization, what does it look like? That ability to not get stuck in the here and now, day to day, but to take more of a long-term, bigger picture view enables you to see more possibility. And paradoxically, the research shows conclusively Organizations that take a longer term perspective deliver greater short term performance because they see avenues to performance and growth that otherwise would be hidden to them. So if you can have that time machine and think about a future that you want to create, and then of course turn it into the things you're going to do day to day, that is the unlock that enables you to do all the great things that Kelsey and Claudia have talked about, in my view.
That's great. That's great. So we've got a couple minutes left, some space for questions. So just want to remind people to feel free to send them in the Q&A, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. I see a bunch coming in here. There's one question, Scott, maybe on this topic that I'll put to you. If how do you catalyze if I could that change in leaders? So if you're not in that sort of top senior leadership group, but you're maybe one or two levels below, and you're seeing the importance of this topic and trying to drive that mindset shift, how do you think about sort of influencing and starting to manifest that change?
Yeah, always a fan of the William Gibson line. The future's already arrived. It's just not very evenly distributed. And the more that you can get leaders to understand that you're not talking about some far distant future where you have to think about these things, again, that longer term perspective helps you see opportunity. But as you heard very clearly from Claudia and Kelsey, this is affecting people right now. Consumers are making buying decisions right now. People are making decisions about what organizations they want to go to right now. You don't often see that when you're at the very top of the organization because, as Rita McGrath likes to remind us, snow melts at the edges. So you get leaders to the edges, to the periphery, to the places where this is already happening. The startups that are doing interesting things, the younger employees that are voting with their feet, the consumers that are making choices with their wallets. You make it visceral and tangible. That really helps. I've also seen when you do get a leader to look through the eyes of their children, and many of the leaders of today's organizations have children that are in their teens and 20s. That's just the way it works. That can help them begin to understand and empathize with some of these things at a deeper level. So those are at least a couple things that I've seen that can help with, again, what is a very complex problem.
Yeah, that's great. Maybe here's another question, coming in, circling back on sort of the process and org piece, and Kelsey or Claudia, I don't know if one of you want to take this, but it feels like completely transforming an organization in the way that Unilever has, for example, is a journey over kind of many years. I'm curious your experience. Where do you get started? So certainly the language and some of the pieces we've talked about, but if you think about all those organizational enablers, are there some that stand out as things to work on first? I think is the gist of the question.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
No, from my perspective, I think the first thing you have to do, it really needs to come from the top. So that is strategic commitment and intent that really reflects the objective and aspiration of the organization. That for me, it's a prerequisite to really make sure that you get the impact. I mean, we talk a lot about several factors that need to be in place. And the truth is that you don't need to make them all at once. Sometimes that can be also very difficult, but as long as you take that journey of taking that first step and identify that you need to then, tackle what comes next, I think that will get you started. But without that top buy-in, it's going to be very difficult to get the resources, the prioritization, the attention that you would need to make things really meaningful and have impact.
I would fully agree. If I might just add one further point on this, I think that strategic commitment is critical to have a mandate. One thing we also find helpful is really those demonstration projects. If you have one or two of them that are successful, that can build so much organizational excitement. And one of the ways we've seen that, and I know Ned, you and I have thought quite a bit about this, but for example, the topic of circularity, right? Circularity is a huge, complex, difficult issue, and basically identifying some projects, some potential projects by mapping out the ecosystem and saying, where are the highest potential areas? There was one industrials company where they said, we're mid-sized, like this is way too much for us right now. We're going to start with renewable feedstock. That's all we're going to do. That's going to be our whole focus. And just by starting with that and then building excitement was one way they were able to then start putting all those other enablers in place. So that's just the only thing I would add on to that.
That's great. Thank you. Well, I realize, we're a minute over, and as promised, this topic is clearly too big to fully unpack in a mere, 30 minutes. But let me thank Scott, Claudia, and Kelsey for your time and your perspectives and the leadership that you're demonstrating on this topic. And thanks to all the participants for joining and the questions. And apologies in advance we didn't get to all of them. We'll put some additional links, I think, with some articles that this collective group has written that I think will shed some light on the ones we didn't get to. But again, thank everybody for your time. Feel free to reach out to any of us if it'd be helpful to talk further.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day.
Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Ned.
Thanks, Ned.